You never really know who lives behind the door next to you until it's too late. We pass by them every day, a simple nod in the hallway, a polite smile by the mailbox, maybe a casual exchange of words over the fence. But what happens when the neighbor you thought was harmless is watching you closer than you realize? Imagine waking in the dead of night, the silence so thick it presses against your ears, only to see your bedroom door slowly swinging open, even though you locked it. What would you do if the person who lives just a few feet away knew exactly how you slept, how you breathed, and how helpless you really were? Tonight, you'll hear two real stories that prove danger doesn't always come from the streets or the shadows. Sometimes it waits behind the neighbor's door. These are accounts where safety was shattered, where the walls meant to protect became thin barriers against something unsettling. Picture dimly lit hallways where light bulbs flicker, where every footstep echoes louder than it should. Picture doors that never seem fully shut, locks that feel fragile under the weight of an unseen presence, a faint knocking in the night, a shadow that lingers too long under the crack of your door. These stories will take you inside that tension, the unease of realizing that the person closest to your home might be the one you should fear most. And though the details are different, both stories are tied together by the same disturbing truth. You can never truly know what happens behind the neighbor's door. Story 1. The Night Visitor. It began with something small. A knock. Not loud, not urgent. Just a faint tap against her door sometime after midnight. At first, she thought nothing of it. A mistake, perhaps. Someone at the wrong apartment. She stayed in bed, listening to the silence that followed. But when the same knock came again the following night, and then again the night after that, unease began to take hold. The building itself was a vessel of echoes, pipes that groaned as if they were alive, floorboards that carried the weight of unseen footsteps, hallways so narrow that every shadow seemed too close. But these knocks, they weren't like the natural sounds of an old complex. They came only when the world outside was quiet, only when her eyes were heavy and the rest of attendants had long since gone to sleep. At first, she tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a prank, a neighbor's child, or just the shifting of the wooden frame in the cold night air. But then small things began to change. She would wake to find her door unlocked, though she remembered turning the key. A chair shifted slightly from its place. A window cracked open when she was sure she had closed it. Little movements, small displacements, but enough to make her wonder whether she had truly forgotten or whether someone else had been there. There was a neighbor across the hall, a man in his 40s, polite enough in passing, always with a nod, sometimes with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He carried groceries at odd hours, bags filled with things she never really saw clearly. He seemed harmless, ordinary even, but something about him began to stand out. The way he lingered in the hallway after others had gone inside. The way his footsteps slowed whenever he passed her door. The silence that followed, as though he were listening for movement within. One night, she woke to something different. Not a knock this time. Breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate, just beyond her door. She froze, lying in the dark, her pulse thundering in her ears. The breathing continued for several long seconds, and then it shifted, moving away down the hall. From that night on, she could no longer dismiss it. Someone was coming to her door. Someone was waiting there in the darkness, when the rest of the world was asleep. The pattern grew. Weeks of knocking, footsteps, and faint breathing. Each time she checked the locks, each time she told herself she was safe, the same ritual repeated. The fear became constant, lingering through her days and pressing against her when night returned. And then came the night that shattered her illusions of safety. She woke up abruptly, her heart hammering, though she couldn't say why. The room was still, silent, too silent. She turned her head toward the doorway and saw it. Her door was open, not wide, but just enough to reveal a sliver of the hallway. And in that narrow crack of darkness, she saw the outline of a figure, perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching her from the shadows. She lay frozen, every muscle screaming to move, to run, to scream. But nothing came. The air felt colder, heavier, as though she were pinned to the mattress. The figure never moved, never breathed, until finally the door began to close, slowly, quietly, until it shut. She sat in silence until morning, too afraid to rise, too afraid to check if the nightmare had been real. But when dawn came, she discovered something chilling. On the inside of her door, just below the lock, faint scratches, as though someone had been tampering at it within. Terrified, she contacted the landlord, who changed the locks immediately. But that did not stop it. The following night, the knocking returned, this time louder, more insistent. And when she looked through the peephole, expecting to find no one, she saw him, her neighbor, standing there, perfectly still, his face far too close to the door, his eyes unblinking, staring directly into the lens. She steps back, covering her mouth to keep from screaming. Minutes passed, but he didn't move, just stood there, breathing against the wood, until eventually he walked away. By then, the fear was overwhelming. She went to the police, reporting the intrusions, the unlocked door, the neighbor's behavior. But without proof of forced entry, without evidence, little could be done. They advised her to stay vigilant, to call if anything escalated. It escalated that very week. One night, exhausted and desperate for us, she finally drifted into sleep. But something woke her, an almost imperceptible sound. The creak of floorboards inside her apartment. She sat up slowly, the air thick with dread. And there he was, standing at the foot of her bed, her neighbor, watching. The scream caught in her throat as she lunged for the lamp, but the instant she moved, he bolted, darting out through the open door and vanishing down the hallway. The authorities came, and this time they found what she feared: a spare key tucked into his belongings. Evidence that he had been entering her apartment for months, watching her as she slept. The knocks, the breathing, the open door had been his way of testing her fear. And then while she slept, unaware and vulnerable, her neighbor had been inside. Some say the mind eventually finds comfort in distance. That once dangerous, moved, fear fades. But for her, it never did. Because even after he was gone, she would still wake in the dead of night, her heart racing, convinced
that the door was about to open again, convinced that someone was standing in the shadows, convinced that the night visitor had never really left.
Story 2. The Locked Door Mystery. In every neighborhood, there was always one house that feels different. The curtains are drawn tighter, the lights come on at unusual hours, and the people inside seem like shadows, visible but never fully present. For one man, that house belongs to his neighbor, a neighbor who smiled politely during the day, but whose home concealed something he could never have imagined. It started with sounds, soft at first, a faint scratching against the walls, a muffled thud late at night, something that resembled crying. At first, he dismissed it. Old houses make strange noises, but these sounds seemed deliberate. They came in patterns, always after midnight, always when he was alone and listening closely. The walls carried whispers, low, fractured, impossible to make out. Some nights it was weeping, other nights sharp gasps that ended abruptly as though someone had been silenced. He told himself it was a television, or perhaps the neighbor arguing on the phone, but the truth gnawed at him. The house next door was hiding something. One evening, while taking out the trash, he noticed it. A single door in his neighbor's house, always shut, always locked. The house had windows in nearly every room, but this one space was hidden. Even from the outside, there were no windows to peer through, just brick, just emptiness. And it was behind that wall that the sounds seemed to come. He tried to ignore it, but the more he noticed, the worse it became. A foul smell began drifting to the vents they shared, not constant, but fleeting, like rotting food, damp earth, and something metallic beneath it all. Sometimes it lingered for hours, sometimes it came and went in seconds, replaced with the silence of the night. The neighbor always had explanations, strange, casual comments when questioned. He claimed he lived alone, that the noises were nothing but pipes or pests, that the smell came from old groceries left too long. But his words didn't match the truth that seeped through the walls. Then came the night that changed everything. It was just past midnight when the sound broke through again. This time, it wasn't muffled or faint. It was unmistakable. A scream, raw, desperate, cut short as though someone had covered a mouth mid-breath. The man froze, listening, his heart racing, and then silence. He hesitated, wondering if he had imagined it. But moments later, the scream came again, louder, sharper. It was followed by frantic banging against the wall, shaking the picture frames on his own side. Someone was in that room. Someone was trying to get out. He called the police. When they arrived, the neighbor was calm, even polite. He insisted nothing was wrong, that no one else lived there. He even opened the front door with a smile, allowing the officers to step inside. The house was neat, orderly, unremarkable. Rooms were tidy, the kitchen spotless. The air scented faintly of cleaning products. For a moment, it seemed as though the noises had been nothing more than imagination. But then the officers reached the locked door. It stood at the end of a narrow hallway, plain, wooden, featureless, but heavy. When asked to open it, the neighbor's demeanor shifted. His excuses were immediate, sharp. He claimed it was storage. He had lost the key. There was nothing inside worth seeing. But the smell, the same rotting, metallic stench, seeped through the cracks around the frame. The officers forced it open. What lay beyond silenced the room. Inside was a space no larger than a closet. Bare walls, concrete floor, no windows. But in the center was a chair, its legs bolted to the ground, its arms scarred with deep grooves. And sitting in it was a woman, malnourished, trembling, her wrists bound, her eyes wide with terror. She had been there for weeks, possibly months, hidden in plain sight. The truth spelled out in fragments. She had been reported missing months before. The neighbor had lured her, kept her locked away, feeding her just enough to keep her alive, silencing her when her screams grew too loud. The sounds through the walls had been real. The cries, the banging, the pleading whispers. One of them had been a desperate attempt to be heard. The man who had suspected something all along felt the weight of guilt. He had heard it for weeks, maybe longer. He had smelled it. He had known in his bones that something was wrong. And yet he hesitated, waiting until the screams became undeniable. The neighbor was arrested, charged with kidnapping and imprisonment. The woman was freed, though scarred forever by what she endured. The house was sealed, its windows shuttered, its door padlocked, but the story remained. Those who lived nearby swore that long after the house was emptied, the sounds continued. Knocks midnight, faint cries slipping through the cracks, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the suffering within them, echoing it back long after the crime was exposed. And for the man who lived next door, sleep never came easily again, because he knew that for every scream he heard, there had been countless others he didn't. And he could never shake the thought that if he had acted sooner, the story might have ended differently. The locked door was open that night, but what it revealed left an entire neighborhood wondering how long they had truly lived beside a nightmare.
2 doors, 2 neighbors, 2 lives shattered by the very people who lived just a few steps away. These stories remind us of something most would rather forget, that danger doesn't always knock from outside. Sometimes it waits quietly, just beyond the wall. Sometimes it already has the key. The neighbors in these stories were not strangers in the dark. They were familiar faces, the kind you might greet with a smile, the kind you might pass without a second thought. And yet, behind closed doors, they carried secrets capable of turning an ordinary home into a place of terror. So the next time you hear a knock late at night, the next time footsteps echo just a little too close, ask yourself, do you truly know who lives behind a door next to yours? Or are you only seeing what they want you to see? What do you think happened in these cases? Could it happen again? Could it already be happening in your own building, on your own street, just one door away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us which story haunted you most. And if you have your own neighbor story, something you've never told anyone before, leave it in the comments. Your story could be the next one we tell here. If this left you uneasy, unsettled, maybe even checking your logs tonight, then subscribe for more, because what you've just heard is only the beginning. And in our next video, we'll take you inside a place far worse than any neighbor's home. A place where the walls do more than echo. They trap the living. The haunted asylum. Until then, listen closely, watch carefully, because sometimes the person you fear most is already standing right outside your door.